The following is a special presentation.
If they were alive today, the men who built this, what would they say about what happened here? This was to have been a monument to their grand dreams and a century of progress. They couldn't have known what would happen. It was a landmark from the day it first rose above the skyline. When it was finished, you could see it from everywhere. They say its beacon shined for 100 miles. They say it was the Superman building and the dirigibles once moored to its tower. Some say it was cursed. So they say. For most of a century, it towered above the city's busiest intersection. Time and circumstance brought it to this, but even as a ruin, it stood as a memorial to a city's best and worst efforts. The men who built it, if they could see it today, restored, brought back from the dead, they would say a lot can happen in a century, and that they had been right all along. When you are in St. Louis, go to the center of the city. Stand at the corner of Grand and Olive. Look up. That is the Continental Life Building.
American Tower is made possible by
Charter Communications is your neighborhood cable television and high-speed internet company. Charter Communications employs and serves thousands of your neighbors in the bi-state area and is working to connect you to the exciting future of entertainment and information technology.
Ameren UE, celebrating a century of excellence in providing reliable power, reasonable rates, and community support throughout the St. Louis region, and supporting programs like American Tower. Visit us on the web at www.ameren.com.
HBD Contracting has been building and restoring St. Louis landmarks for almost 80 years. From renovation to new construction, HBD builds its reputation on listening to customers and satisfying their needs. HBD Contracting, creating our community one success at a time.
and through the support of the members of KETC.
If these towers stand, either in steel or in the words of men now living who have seen them, the nations of another time will speculate as to their origin and their creators and their cause. They will imagine young and arrogant and reckless men who delighted in extreme height and great richness of decoration, and were proud of their victories over the strength of the wind. Fortune Magazine, July 1930. There had never been such a time as those years between the Great War and the Great Depression. Americans felt proud and lucky to be a part of a new century of bigger, better, faster, and more. Anything was possible. A family could own a home, a motor car, an icebox, a talking machine. The sky was the limit, and the skyscraper became the symbol of our triumph over the past. Prosperity joined forces with new technologies to shuttle us from the streets to the clouds in vertical cities. In 1923, St. Louis passed an $87 million bond issue, the largest ever approved by an American city, to set in motion a building boom that would, over the next decade, give the city a new profile. Downtown became a giant construction site. Market Street would be transformed into a boulevard of government and culture with a new civic center at 12th and Market. Private corporations such as Missouri Pacific, Southwestern Bell, and Shell Oil would build their own downtown palaces. It was a time when someone with enough ambition and daring might believe he could achieve just about anything. scoundrel, hero, legend. People chose different words to describe Edmund Monroe Mays, but it was hard to know just what to say about a man who came out of the backwoods and built a skyscraper. Home for Mays was Leslie, Arkansas, a tiny town buried deep in hill country. At the turn of the century, it was a place that could teach its sons and daughters hard lessons. Ed learned how to make do with what he had. Where most people saw wilderness, Ed saw trees, lots of them. By the time he was 30, he had made a small fortune manufacturing barrel staves and wagon wheel hubs. It was in Leslie where he learned the banking business. At 6'1", Edmund Mays stood ramrod straight, a handsome man, dark-eyed and supremely confident.
He was a very striking man. A lot of people I grew up with said they were always afraid of him, not because he was gruff or mean, but just because of his presence.
Hard work and self-reliance were supreme virtues in this vestige of the American frontier. Ed had gumption, too, and in 1921, he took the train to St. Louis to seek his fortune.
Cussedness. That's kind of an old hill word. I just think that's, what's that? It's a little ornery and determination and stick to it all together. Is that cussedness?
St. Louis was good to Mays. Within a few years, a series of shrewd deals had established him as president of the Grand National Bank and the Continental Life Insurance Company. He was rich. He had earned influential friends and powerful enemies. It was 1928. There seemed no end to this great American age, no reason to believe that it would not go on forever. It occurred to Ed Mays that he should build a monument to his success, a tower, and he knew exactly where it should stand. The city of St. Louis sweeps back from the Mississippi River in a series of gently rising terraces. 36 blocks from the Mississippi River, Grand Avenue runs along a ridge of the highest terrace overlooking downtown St. Louis. 1,000 years ago, an Indian trail ran along what is now Grand Avenue. When St. Louis was a village, French farmers cultivated long, narrow strips of fields, beginning at Grand and running west. 200 years later, the streets and alleys west of Grand are still laid out along the original borders of those fields. This painting depicts the corner of Grand and Olive in 1846. Grand Avenue was officially dedicated as the western border of the city in 1850, a pretty area of farms and large country homes. As St. Louis industrialized, pollution drove the wealthier residents of downtown to build gracious Victorian mansions along the streets of what we now call Midtown. By the 1870s, a narrow-gauge railroad was shuttling passengers between St. Louis County and a station near the corner of Grand and Olive. St. Louis University moved to Lindell and Grand in the 1880s. There was talk of Midtown becoming a second downtown as it attracted theaters, restaurants, and shops. By the early 20th century, streetcar lines from every part of the city intersected at the corner of Grand and Olive. It was, and would remain for decades, the city's busiest intersection. In 1928, the city widened Olive Street, channeling a torrent of automobiles and trolleys into the heart of Midtown. Ed Mays' office then was in the old Beers Hotel, which stood at the corner of Grand and Olive. From his office, he noticed that a building erected on the high ground near that intersection, if it were tall enough, could be seen from all over the city. Well, maybe he did come from the backwoods, and maybe he did cut some deals the old family silk-stocking bankers wouldn't have, and maybe self-made boys from Leslie, Arkansas would never be welcome in the inner circles of St. Louis society, but he could look down on them too. This building, it would have to be unlike anything ever built in St. Louis. It would house his Grand National Bank, his Continental Life Insurance Company, and at the very top of it, he would build a penthouse where he and his family would live. And above the penthouse, he would put a beacon, and the light from that beacon would be seen from everywhere. It would be tall, of course, but that was not enough. It had to represent the man Ed Mays in the newest materials and designs of the age. Mays visited New York, where men such as he were changing the skyline. There he discovered a style that spoke to him, captured the way he saw the world, the way he saw himself. Today we call it Art Deco. Defining Art Deco is about as easy as defining Ed Mays. From the mid-1920s into the 40s, Art Deco embraced such a wide variety of styles and flavors that it's really easier to recognize it than it is to describe it. It is fair to say that Art Deco made a break with the past. It celebrated the modern, whatever that might be, and made no apologies for it. Art Deco designers could take almost anything, from a building to an everyday household item, and streamline it, electrify it, jazz it up, until it fit into the modern age. Art Deco architecture made buildings appear taller, brighter, sleeker, rising to the heavens and pointing to the future. Buildings that proclaimed to everyone that this was the 20th century. In a mechanical age, Art Deco softened the machine, made it beautiful and made it fun, promoting faith in a marvelous age everyone knew was right around the corner.
Art Deco streamlining had a very glamorous and theatrical side to it, and designers were called in. Many of these people had actually been theater designers. They were called in to work with engineers to design a style that made them appealing to the public.
Art Deco offered Americans the pizzazz they were looking for, to feel as if they belonged in this new world. New materials such as Bakelite allowed everyday items to be molded into shapes that brought the wonders of the future to a tabletop near you. And so, should it be any surprise that Ed Mays' skyscraper would have to be an Art Deco skyscraper? How is it possible to build something as massive as a 23-story building and make it appear so light and so delicate? The answer lies in the details of a design that succeeds at every point in drawing the eyes upward. Thin vertical ribs in the skin of the Continental Life Building provide the illusion of height to a building that is not really that tall for a skyscraper. A setback at the 16th floor gives it a modern and streamlined look. At night, the beacon on the roof would shine and the white terracotta finish glow under the brilliance of electric lights.
Illuminating buildings from the exterior and really, again, playing into the drama and the theatricality and emphasizing the verticality and the height of the buildings, almost disappearing into the night sky, was definitely a part of the whole drama and celebration of the new frontier.
Days, it could be every bit as dramatic.
The light terracotta has a way of reflecting the sunlight. So it catches the light and reflects it in a way that makes it extremely distinctive. And I think it's that causes people to recognize it and gets their attention.
The presence of Ed Mays is on every floor, the devil in the details, the driving force behind the architect and builders. The original plans called for giant classical statues looking down from the upper floors. Mays ordered them changed to Continental soldiers, reflecting the name of his insurance company. Beside them, colonial women held their babies high above Olive Street, safe and secure at Continental Life. This would be a building St. Louis could not ignore. Ed Mays' skyscraper would be adorned with lightning bolts and Liberty bells, cornucopia, fountains, and the earth itself. But how odd his choice of architects. William Butts Ittner, a man who had never built anything even closely resembling Ed Mays' vision of his Midtown Tower.
That might also be one of the reasons for its charm. When an architect does his first building in a particular building type, often it will be the best one he ever built in that building type. And there's a reason for that. He knows that he doesn't know something, so he goes out and tries to find out about things. if you're going to make a mistake, I've always felt that it probably is better to make that mistake on the side of the exuberance.
In 1929, William Ettner was 65 years old and nationally recognized as the architect who redesigned the urban public school building, bringing light, fresh air, and elegance to what had been, until then, dreary red brick boxes. Ettner designed more than 50 schools in St. Louis in the first 2 decades of the century, and over 500 schools around the United States. His schools were revolutionary, but they were not tall, and they were not deco.
At this point in his career, to risk that and to be as successful as the building had been as an architectural statement is a pretty significant tribute to a man who had done a lot of things, but not that particular kind of thing.
The collaboration between Ed Mays and William B. Ettner grew out of a strong mutual admiration. Ettner was the son of a prominent St. Louis family and old enough to be Mays' father. Both men were driven men, not afraid to take risks. Both achieved success early in their careers. Ettner was a board member and major investor in the Continental Life Insurance Company. Upon completion of the building, he would lease the entire 20th floor for his architectural firm. Personal friends and professional colleagues, the two men appreciated each other's great reservoirs of confidence, ability, and ego. They came to embrace this project as a monument to their lives, their achievements, and their friendship. Ed Mays swung the first pick to break ground in November of 1928. No expense was spared. The cost per square foot was higher than that of the Empire State Building. Promotional brochures gushed over the marvels of this 20th century skyscraper. One boasted of 23 stories of sunlit offices opening upon the pure air zone, above the noise and dust of the streets. The marble 2-story lobby of the Grand National Bank was among the most impressive in town. In the alley between the bank and the Fox Theater, a drive-up window allowed customers to bank from their cars. There was underground parking for as many as 50 vehicles. A ballroom on the 5th floor. But the crowning touch, that would be the penthouse. In the midst of construction, Mays announced his plans, to the surprise of many, including his wife and 2 daughters, that the Mays family would be moving into the top 3 floors. Other wealthy St. Louisans might move west. They would move up to the highest residence in St. Louis. Lavish only begins to describe the penthouse. One room included a fountain with a bronze heron spewing water into a pool filled with goldfish. A mural of Mays' Arkansas countryside covered the walls. On the wall of his study hung a poem. A sorry life the banker leads, there's little glory in his deeds. When he says no, the people curse. When he says yes, it's even worse. There was a music room, an enormous living room with a stone fireplace. A winding, bronze-railed staircase led to a 2nd floor with 6 bedrooms and 5 baths, each in a different color. Several rooms opened out to terraces on balconies overlooking the city. The Globe Democrat wrote, "Only a faint pulsating roar that can only be heard on the roof garden disturbs the aloof quiet of the upper atmosphere. The sun seems stronger, and the breeze is stiffer." Mays paid the Continental Life Insurance Company $1,000 a month to live in the penthouse, but he found himself able to afford it when, shortly before completion of the building, his salary as president of Continental Life increased from $15,000 to $25,000 a year. Life was good at the top. 23 floors below, there were problems. The official opening of the Continental Life Building was still weeks away when on Sunday morning, May 25, 1930, the Grand National Bank was robbed of over $1 million in cash, securities, and jewelry. Today, it remains the largest unsolved robbery in St. Louis history. The bank was still located next door in the Beers Hotel. In preparation for the move to the Continental Life Building, the 17-ton door to the vault had been removed. A special police detail guarded the contents. Except on that Friday, the bank informed the police that their services would not be needed that weekend. On Sunday, bank officials found that the vault had been broken into and 160 safe deposit boxes pried open and emptied. When the bank opened on Monday morning, hundreds of angry and frightened customers were lined up along Grand Avenue to close their accounts with Grand National Bank. Police found the tools, but not the thieves. There were suspects, some arrests, but no convictions. There was talk that it was an inside job, but no proof. 7 weeks later, on July 21st, 1930, the Continental Life Building staged its official grand opening. The mood was not entirely celebratory. The nation was not rebounding from last October's stock market crash. Businesses were closing. St. Louisans were losing their jobs. Some people were calling it a depression.
When Ed Mays built the Continental Building, the idea wasn't that it stand all alone by itself like some prehistoric monument. The idea was that downtown development or midtown development would extend around it. Well, as with many other investors of the time, he faced October of 1929 and was forced to deal with the consequences. So it really did end up being a kind of an isolated statement, and in a sense, the last hurrah of this second downtown.
During the Great Depression, the Continental Life Building stood, visible from neighborhoods around the city, as a reminder of better times. From the street, it was not apparent that many of the floors were unoccupied or unfinished. Back in Searcy County, Arkansas, Ed Mays was growing into a folk legend. If you go there today, people will tell you about Ed Mays, the local boy who went to St. Louis and built himself a skyscraper. Some remember, others just heard the stories about how Ed gave home folk jobs in the Continental Life Building when the Depression took the last of what little they had.
My job, I was on the 5th floor of the Continental Life Insurance Company. My title was a messenger boy, and my salary was, I'm pretty sure it was $50 a month. And my sister, she was the elevator lady. Had 2 brothers there that worked in the clearinghouse, and Dad worked in the note cage. Yeah, it was amazing to me how Uncle Ed could do a thing like that. Little fella from Searcy County.
Life was hard for St. Louisans, too. And for many of them, the Continental Life Building is still alive in their memories of those years. Francis Pfeiffer grew up in the 3600 block of Olive, just a few doors west of the Continental Life Building. During the Depression, his father tore the house down, moved the family into the carriage house, and paved the lot over to make a parking lot and make a living during those tough years. Midtown was Francis's world, where he went to school, played, and parked cars for 40 years.
When we first started out, we were parking cars for 5 cents, and we were parking 2 and 3 cars a night, period.
In the 1930s, the Continental Life Building gave a young man working on a midtown parking lot a reason to look up. It cut through the grayness of the 30s, lent some glamour to the neighborhood, and some mystery.
We'd look up there and see those statues, all those various people. We wonder, who is that statue? Where'd they get that? But I don't know, I never did find out what was. I said, oh, that's some old Roman or something that they picked out.
And of course, there was the beacon.
That used to fascinate me in the evening, to look up there and see that big beacon and watch all those birds circling, and I would just imagine it was because of the heat from that light. They'd want to get close to that heat and then just stay in that area. And then, of course, come the next morning, be all gone.
Best in those years not to count on holding on to anything special to you. Not if you were Francis Pfeiffer, not if you were Ed Mays.
It wasn't how much money he could make. I don't think money was the part of it. I think it was doing it, getting the job done, and the conquest of it was the excitement for him.
By 1934, Ed Mays understood that life in a penthouse made for an easy target. He spent most of that year in court. The Missouri State Insurance Commission charged that the close relationship between the finances and management of the Grand National Bank and the Continental Life Insurance Company was illegal. There was the issue of Mays' $25,000 salary, which the state claimed was excessive. Employees of his insurance company accused him of forcing them to deposit 10% of their salaries in the Grand National Bank, then trade their deposits for stock in Continental Life. It didn't help matters when the state discovered that Continental Life helped Mays decorate his penthouse, $72,000 on furnishings, $5,000 for drapes. Mays welcomed a good fight. Who was the state of Missouri to say how he should run his business? He would at least go down swinging.
He loved law. He had a huge collection of law books. I think he relished a good court battle or a good lawsuit. You'd say he cut corners because he thought, according to the law, somewhere along the way, he thought, you know, I can do that.
The court disagreed. The Continental Life Insurance Company was handed over to the state. Along with it, the Continental Life Building. On July 27, 1934, Mays, 19 months behind on his rent, was evicted from the penthouse. When the sheriff and the press showed up at his door, the world must have collapsed for Ed Mays. He had tried, and he had failed. The courts had taken his building, his tower, his monument, his home. A sorry life the banker leads. There's little glory in his deeds. When he says no, the people curse. When he says yes, it's even worse. The light at the top of the beacon went dark. The penthouse remained empty until 1941, when it was converted to a commercial photo studio. Ed Mays returned to Leslie, Arkansas. For a short time, he and his family moved into a log cabin. Then he converted an old schoolhouse into a home, decorating it with many of the trappings of the penthouse. Photos from those years show a thin and haggard Ed Mays.
He loved this place right here, and that's when he was defeated there, he come right back here to show people that he wasn't finished. That's determination if I know it.
From a small office he built behind the house, he got back into the barrel stave business, which did well after the repeal of Prohibition. He raised Hereford cattle, and though he never quit trying to get his building back, the game was over. Ed Mays died, a respected citizen, a favored son.
He's all those things that you think about of the little boy from the country with, you know, wanting to do more and or having a dream and pursuing it and accomplishing the dream. Losing the dream and then just bouncing back on your feet and pursuing another.
Out of spite, the state of Missouri had the bronze letters spelling life pried off from above the front door. That was sometime in 1936. And from then on, through its best and worst days, the Continental Life Building came to be known simply as the Continental Building. New owners installed air conditioning on all but the first floor and the penthouse. It was the first major office building in Missouri to have air conditioning. They relit the beacon, but in spite of its efforts to regain respectability, the Continental Building would limp with the rest of America through the Great Depression and another war, with many of its floors vacant. It was the beginning of an unsteady history for a building that never made a profit for a long series of owners.
This is an ego building. Ego buildings don't make money because they're uneconomic. Too much money is spent on them, and they're not practical, and this is not a practical building.
Beautiful and impractical may be, but if Ed Mays' vanity was mixed into the mortar that held the Continental Building together, so was his spirit to endure. After 15 years of depression and war, America was ready to get back to business. Midtown was a bustling city center of restaurants, shops, and medical offices. It was St. Louis's Great White Way, alive in the glow of the great movie palaces, the St. Louis, the Missouri, the Fox, the Schubert. The Continental Building was home to Chrysler, Buick, General Motors, Owens Illinois Glass, Ford Motor Company, and McGraw-Hill. Directly across the street was Garavelli's, one of the city's most popular eateries. Midtown offered a variety of things to see and do. For many St. Louisans who were young in those years, perhaps returning from the war, the building and the entire neighborhood still occupy an important place in their memories.
When I came back to St. Louis, I wanted to be a photographer. I wanted to work at one of the best studios in town. So I looked through the telephone book, and the Todd Studios was the best in town. It was up in the Continental Building, penthouse, 21st, 2nd, and 3rd floor.
Clifford Martin was a Navy photographer during the war, accompanying American troops in combat missions throughout the Pacific Theater. At Iwo Jima, he climbed to the top of Mount Suribachi and recorded the movie footage of the hoisting of the American flag.
So Mr. Wilson Todd came out, and he said, well, we're not hiring anybody right at the present. And I said, well, I'm one of the best photographers there is. And he said, when can you start to work? I said, I can start right now. He said, well, if you'd have said tomorrow or the next week, he said, I wouldn't hire you. But he says, since you said you're willing to work right now, he says, I'll take you on. He says, will you work for 75 cents an hour? I said, gladly.
Martin worked among some of the most talented commercial photographers in St. Louis there at the top of Midtown. He eventually bought the studio. Something about the penthouse seemed to attract colorful characters. Mr. Wilson Todd was fond of fishing in Forest Park and keeping his fish live in the penthouse fountain. Here's Clifford Martin offering the catch of the day to a favored client. In the mid-50s, the penthouse shifted from photography and fish to beer, housing the executive offices of the Falstaff Brewing Company. Some of the few remaining images of the penthouse are preserved in this home movie shot by the Falstaff employees who worked there. Betty Moses is one of the young women in this film.
It was almost a fairy land place. The patio was really neat. You had to climb up and go through a window that was a door. We would go out there and have lunch sometimes. The view, you know, you could see for miles. It was, and the sky was right there, you know.
But something was happening to Midtown. There were crowds, there was traffic, but there were signs that maybe it was no longer the city center it once was. Falstaff left the penthouse in 1957. Then more companies left, and new tenants claimed their spaces. Miss Vanderschmidt's secretarial school moved into the lobby. Midtown grew shabby, then dangerous.
The crime wave sort of blew across the area. You had a lot of holdups, a lot of muggings. You felt you were run out of your home.
In 1961, Blue Shield moved in, occupying enough floors to keep the building open. But the beacon was turned off and would remain dark for over 40 years. The Great Depression had hurt the Continental Building. Now prosperity was threatening to kill it. St. Louis was building highways to take its people and businesses to the county. Those who remained did the best they could. Tom Marshall was the air name of announcer Dick Hewlett in 1966 when he worked at KADI, broadcasting high atop the 14th floor of the not-so-glamorous Continental Building.
The building was trying to conserve a lot of money. They apparently had lost some tenants. So they'd shut the air conditioner off 3:30, 4 o'clock, figuring the building wouldn't warm up until after 5, till everyone was out of the building. That was everyone except us, the radio station, which was on the air 24 hours a day. So the answer was for us to get an air conditioner. So we got a window unit and proceeded to put it on the building. Well, the real estate people said, you can't do that. It'll ruin the lines of the building. So we decided there was an office that was unoccupied and had a whole bunch of old records in it or something. So we cut a hole in the wall, put the air conditioner in, and vented the hot air and humidity from the air conditioner into this other office. And we were very comfortable. The room got up to about 180 degrees, but we were fine.
If you were in high school between 1959 and 1973, you might have ridden the elevator to the penthouse to have your senior picture taken at the Vincent Price Photo Studio. The end came when Blue Shield announced that it was leaving for new quarters in West County. In February of 1974, the front door was boarded up. The owner at the time, New York Life, considered demolishing it, but determined it was not economically feasible. The Continental Building was not even worth tearing down. At first, it seemed unthinkable that the Continental Building would remain empty for long.
At the time, it was the only building in the area that was empty. And it was essentially intact. There was no damage. It was just dusty, you know, a little dirty, but it was just sitting there closed up and ready for someone to come in and take it on.
It looked as if the building would open again when Hudson Security offered to buy it for $35,000. Closing was set for February 15th, 1978.
And the day before closing, one of the pipes froze in the basement, and the basement filled up with water.
There was major damage to the air conditioning systems, plumbing, telephone equipment, electrical boards and motors, and the elevators. That's when the vandals moved in and began systematically stripping every floor. They stole the treasures of the building in broad daylight, and no one stopped them. The deal was dead.
They must have had 2 or 3 or 4 people in here on a daily basis. They backed the truck down from the alley, and then they'd throw stuff out the upper floors, and then they'd sweep them into the truck and they'd drive out. So they had a loading zone down there to take all of the stuff out of the building.
It was frustrating, it really was. And I started complaining to the city. Surprisingly, no one seemed to give a damn. You know, they didn't know what they can do, and they just told me to mind my own business.
By 1982, nothing of value remained. The brass mailbox and directory in the lobby, the radiators, every bit of copper had been ripped out and carted off. The revolving door at the Olive Street entrance had been stolen. The clock above the door picked clean. The years passed. The Continental Building loomed on the skyline, a decaying specter. The city's homeless sought shelter there. College students partied on the penthouse balconies. An entire generation of St. Louisans grew up never quite knowing what it was or how it got there. Myths developed around it. People said it was the Daily Planet building in the Superman television series. They said the beacon was once a mooring dock for dirigibles. They whispered that the building had some kind of a curse. There was some kind of curse. On every plan, anyone proposed to turn the building back into usable office space. It passed from owner to owner, practically given away to anyone who had a plan. But no one really wanted it, and no one really knew what to do with it. If a ghost ever haunted the empty halls of the Continental Building, it was the ego of Ed Mays, which had created a building that was more beautiful than practical. Conventional wisdom was that the Continental Building would never be restored. But it was not wisdom that would save the Continental Building. It was passion.
This is St. Louis's premier Art Deco skyscraper. There isn't a more loved skyscraper in town. And since 1974, it has sat here vacant and stared at us and dared us to come do something with it.
The Continental Building first caught Steve Trampe's attention in 1977 during a round of discussions among a group of developers about how the neighborhood might be rehabilitated as an arts and entertainment center.
For some reason, we saved the Continental till almost last, and somebody said, well, what should we do with the Continental? And we just all looked at each other, and then all of a sudden we kind of laughed and chuckled because everyone knew it didn't make any sense. And so said, well, we'll save that one till later.
Everyone wanted to do it. No one knew how. In the late 70s and early 80s, older cities such as St. Louis were rediscovering their historic neighborhoods. Developers could make money rehabbing old buildings, attracting a new generation of so-called urban pioneers, many of whom grew up in the suburbs. But in 1987, the federal government passed a tax reform act that removed many incentives for developers to renovate historic buildings. Projects in neighborhoods all over St. Louis came to a halt. 10 years later, the state of Missouri enacted its own tax credit program, making many historic renovations feasible again. Steve Trampe applied the new math and figured that total restoration of the Continental Building would cost $28 million. With the new tax credits, he could do it, if he could convince the city, the state, St. Louis University, and other investors to help fund the project. But it could not work as an office building. It had never really worked as an office building. There was a possibility that it could have a new life as an apartment building. Apartments would range from easily affordable efficiencies and smaller units to luxury spaces on the upper floors and in the penthouse. It was preposterous. It was outrageous. It was worth a shot.
Some of us in the development community had always talked about this challenge-wise as really the Mount Everest of development deals. And there's certainly been times during the process that I've thought, well, maybe it's more the Mount St. Helens.
Trampe's plan was based on almost half the money coming from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. HUD could make or break the deal.
My first introduction to the redevelopment of the Continental Building was not a very favorable one from the HUD staff. They had recommended that we do not get involved in the redevelopment of that building.
I thought if I tell them the story of the Continental and what it meant to St. Louis as one of St. Louis's greatest landmarks, that I could convince them that they should be involved in the project.
We walked all 26 stories of the building, and on each floor, Steve had a story to tell us about that building.
He was so enthusiastic and told me such great stories about the building after making me walk 26 stories in cutesy little strapped high-heeled shoes that I just had to find a way to make it work. I told him the developers that pester me the most, those are the ones that get the job done.
So all that remained was the rehabilitation of a 23-story Art Deco skyscraper that had been plundered, gutted, and subjected to the elements for a quarter of a century.
You know, the day of closing, everything changes because you go from the world of bankers and suits and ties to a construction world. And you go from a building that's inhabited only by cats to a building that comes alive with activity, to really start to bring a skeleton to life.
On the morning of June 18, 2001, the sky was a cobalt blue, and the wind so gusty it threatened to blow the tent away at the groundbreaking ceremony.
We are going to rehab the Continental Building.
But gutting and renovating a 23-story building with few entrances, no staging area, and no functioning elevator posed challenges. The solution lay in creating an intricate choreography of demolition and construction, with debris moving down and out, while construction material moved in and up.
It's like the D-Day landing. It takes so much planning because you've got, in essence, kind of 2,000 boats and different things in each boat. And, they've all got to hit the beach at the same time, but not fall over each other when they get there.
A union job from the basement to the beacon. Some 30 trades were employed. Laborers, electrical workers, iron workers, carpenters, tinners, fitters, plumbers. Timing was the key. Each trade had to get in with its tools and materials at precisely the right time, do the job, and get out when its work was done.
Everybody knows what their job is, and no one seems to step over their bounds because of that. It's part of being mostly a union job. Everyone's rule is spelled out very clearly.
Erecting a new building calls for the execution of clear and well-thought-out plans. Renovating a building is part construction, part archaeology, and a lot about surprises. Daily, workers had to improvise in the face of the unexpected, which could include a staircase sealed and forgotten behind a wall.
Hey, what's up there? Marble goes all the way up to the ceiling as far as I can see up there.
Demolition peeled back walls, revealing the graffiti of workers who thought maybe someone someday might read their words and remember them. As the renovation progressed, it was as if the building were letting go of secrets to the workers who were bringing it back to life.
One of the more interesting things we do to find dates around here on what floor was poured in each area is same thing we do nowadays to control concrete when we're pouring. We'll stuff newspapers in the holes and stuff. And as you can see, they did the same thing back then. So what we do is we pull the newspapers out of the concrete areas, find the dates, and then we know exactly what day they actually poured each floor. So it's kind of neat.
It's nice to try to redo something that another union man probably did 50, 60, 70 years ago, you know, and to try to duplicate it or replicate it as good or better than what they did using newer products. But we really give a lot of credit to these guys when we see what they did so many years ago with the limited resources and tools that they had compared to what we have now. We find a lot of respect in those guys when you see these old buildings.
A project this special called for a badge, a symbol, to show that this was not your usual construction job.
Yeah, everybody on the job here has a Superman sticker that's working on his job, because originally this was believed to be the building that they filmed the original Superman. And I've got guys on other jobs call me, they see our stickers and they want their sticker, and I tell them, if you want a sticker, come down here and work and we'll get you a sticker.
But even as workmen were discovering remnants of the 1920s and 30s behind the walls and beneath the floors, American history was getting a new chapter. And after September 11, 2001, the Continental Building offered its face as a reassuring symbol. The hugeness of renovating a skyscraper is almost impossible to imagine. Work progressed for a year and a half through every kind of season and weather St. Louis can serve up. A single small elevator attached to the front of the building moved workers, equipment, and material up and down. 23 floors were stripped to the bones, rebuilt and rearranged to serve a new purpose in a new age. Some walls were torn down, others put up. Every inch of the terracotta skin was cleaned and repaired. The Continental soldiers, the pioneer women and their babies were patched and polished. Some tasks required power, others precision.
We got the final detail yesterday afternoon in this area on the second floor.
And just to reiterate what we talked about as far as in the penthouse saving,
yes,
the items that we can save, those are marked and you've been over it with.
Right now, removing that.
Okay. Any other artifacts we find, we'd love to set aside.
Key to this restoration was finding and reinstalling as many of the original elements of the building as possible. This would not be easy for a place that had been so thoroughly pillaged. There were old photographs, but not a lot of other clues to help bring back the details. The Art Deco friezes and moldings, the beacon, the clock above the front door, the old mailbox in the lobby. But the luck of the building was turning.
This is a lobby mailbox that
look at the eagle.
Yeah, it's a wonderful composition, isn't it?
It hasn't been there since, what, probably 79?
That's probably about right.
It would have been impossible to come even close to restoring the details of the Continental Building had Steve Trampe not met Larry Giles. Giles' life work and his personal passion is collecting the best parts of demolished buildings. For the past 30 years, he has sought out, stored, and traded many of St. Louis's treasures.
When the Continental Building was being stripped and salvaged, the flow of material out of the building filled many antique shops and junkyards around the city for about a 2-year period. So I was able to assemble approximately 50–60% of the architectural bronze that was used in the lobby and the front entrances of the building, and have had them stored for approximately 20 years.
For years, the clock above the front door of the Continental Life Building was a midtown landmark. Meet you under the clock, they'd say.
You know, the clock was a clock that people looked at for years because it was at the busiest corner in St. Louis. And to think that that clock stopped 40 years ago and the area kind of stopped. And so to me, and maybe this is, you know, this kind of gets almost waxing nostalgic, but to get that clock down and repair it and back up, it's starting time again on the building.
It was through another stroke of luck that restorers could identify who originally created the clock. Among the bird nests and debris in the frame, they found a broken glass shard with an incomplete signature, indicating that it was built by O.B. McClintock of Minneapolis, one of the last great creators of public clocks. Over 12 months, a team of restorers dismantled, cleaned, and rebuilt the timepiece and brought another St. Louis landmark back to life.
It's going to be around a lot longer than we are. We might meet there accidentally. Who may say, I love you under this clock? Hopefully somebody will look up at this clock and say, they did good.
It's sometimes said that we give shape to buildings, and then they give shape to us. Some buildings are special like that. They become a part of our lives, and if we're lucky, we can become a small part of them.
One day, my son and I were in the penthouse, and they had just poured fresh cement. And one of the construction workers said, why don't you guys write your names in the cement? So my son and I, we got down, and it was a very moving experience for me, and we put our initials and the date in the cement. And I was thinking at the time, 70 years from now, somebody's going to find our initials and wonder about us and what we were doing, just like all of the men that had come before us in this building. We had really become a part of the legacy of the Continental Building.
Midtown sparkled on the evening of October 19, 2002. The corner of Grand and Olive was bright and busy as St. Louis turned out to celebrate the second grand opening of the Continental Life Building. Like the old days, some said. The clock glowed above the front entrance. Light spilled out from the windows. There was music, dignitaries, speeches, and a feeling among the crowd that somehow, maybe, they were a part of history that night. Guests inspected the new apartments, admired the penthouse, and offered toasts to a new era for Midtown and better days for the city. It was tempting to imagine Ed Mays striding through this 21st century crowd, invisible and quite pleased with himself. And why shouldn't he be? Hadn't he been right all along? It wasn't just about money with Ed, it was about creating something big, something that would show them all he could do it and make them remember him. At the height of the evening, the crowd turned its attention to the roof. After 40 years of darkness, the beacon was relit. And at that moment, all over the city, St. Louisans looked up and saw that the Continental Life Building was alive again. In 1930, Fortune magazine predicted that generations yet unborn would someday look up at these 20th century creations, these American towers, and think of those who built them and why. In the words of Fortune, they would imagine arrogant and reckless men who delighted in extreme height and great richness of decoration, and were proud of their victories over the strength of the wind.
American Tower was made possible by Charter Communications is your neighborhood cable television and high-speed internet company. Charter Communications employs and serves thousands of your neighbors in the bi-state area and is working to connect you to the exciting future of entertainment and information technology.
Ameren UE, celebrating a century of excellence in providing reliable power, reasonable rates, and community support throughout the St. Louis region, and supporting programs like American Tower. Visit us on the web at www.ameren.com.
HBD Contracting has been building and restoring St. Louis landmarks for almost 80 years. From renovation to new construction, HBD builds its reputation on listening to customers and satisfying their needs. HBD Contracting, creating our community one success at a time.
And through the support of the members of KETC.
To order a VHS copy of American Tower, visit the Suncoast Motion Picture Company stores at West County, Crestwood, South County, and Chesterfield malls, or order online at www.ketc.org.